Hi, I'm Tony Wood, Community Lead for CEO Collaborative Forum, and let's hear CEO Reflects. Now, today we have Timm Urschinger, who's a CEO that's not a CEO. Timm, welcome. What do you mean by that? That's an interesting introduction.
Yeah, thank you, Tony. Pleasure to be here. So, CEO who's not a CEO. I guess in a nutshell, it is we are working in a more holocratic type of way. So, some people might have heard about holocracy, role-based working, self-management, these kind of things. So, to the outside world on LinkedIn, for example, I just say CEO because that's what people kind of can relate to. And then, obviously, in the CEO collaboration forum, it's good to be a CEO. But really, we split responsibilities. It's decentralized decision making for many things. So people don't report into me like in a more traditional setup, probably. So I'm not really a CEO in that sense.
Oh, how interesting. So, does that give you any challenges not being a CEO when you kind of are a little bit of a CEO? I can't talk. I'm community lead, so I think we're both in the same situation.
Yeah. Like everything else, right? It gets its upsides and its downsides as well. So this is what it is here as well. Sometimes I'm thinking, you know what? If I was the CEO, I could just make the decision, call the shots, and the other guys just do what I told them, right? That would be much easier than some of the other dynamics that we're having. At the same time, I do believe that decentralized decision making is good for speed and efficiency in many ways. So we are a lot less bureaucratic. I don't have to sign off expenses. I don't have to sign off people's salary, even because it's self-set salaries. So many things that I don't have to do. But the challenge remains, which is, how do we create alignment and direction with all of the autonomy that we have? And I guess this is a typical CEO challenge, by the way, although many of these colleagues here in the forum have a different setup.
No, and you've chosen a challenge from summer of 2021. That's just like at the tail end or mid COVID. I mean, is that fair to say?
Yes, exactly. I think it's one of the interesting ones actually, because the first part of COVID is already over, and then the second part not yet. So it was an interesting like halfway through COVID challenge.
Love it. And it is, how do I grow from 2 large clients to 10 clients or large clients? Goodness. So that's an ambitious challenge there. And so when you were prepping, what were your thoughts for this challenge before you went into COCF process?
So 2019, so the last year before COVID, if you want to call it that, the first year BC, right? So this is what it is. Anyway, 2019 was a really successful year for us, which was great. Business was going well. We've just been growing a lot, and also 2020, first year of COVID, was actually really, really successful. So 2019, 2020, we've almost doubled in size. So we've kind of all of a sudden been 15, 20 people, when before we was like around 10. And then obviously the challenge comes, like for any other business, how do we grow from these 1-2 bigger clients that we have that are the backbone of the growth that we are having, and actually bringing good business? How do we grow that and diversify from a client perspective, make it a bit more stable, make it probably a bit less risky in a sense, because if one of the 2 big clients was running away for whatever reason, or taking strategic decisions to not work with us or consultants generally, then where do you go? So that was the challenge back then. And
okay, so this was one of the first recommendations from Joe, and obviously we asked everybody who was in the challenge for their permission for these recommendations, because normally it's a trust environment. So we had Joe. So what were Joe's point, and why did you pick these in particular?
First of all, because it's so complementary to what we would usually do and get from our bubble in a way. So Joe said basically highly incentivize people, make sure you have an incentive plan, right? So who works on board, and how do you pay them in a way, right? Now, as I said before, we have self-set salaries, so that's a concept that's incredibly difficult to apply. And only creating that incentive plan for new business or for renewal was nothing we could easily do. So that was good. And then also Joe was going into, well, maybe you should have something like a customer success manager. So if you already got a few of these clients, well, how do you grow them from like small clients into large clients? So I think this was just really 2 interesting aspects. And again, some of which is challenging because simply we don't have incentive plans most of the time.
And his next was an observation where he's saying it does not surprise me that you need sales if you don't have an incentive plan. Who wants to work much harder if they will get paid the same? Do you think that's fair?
Well, I guess to an extent it is, and if you go a bit into the
Yeah.
cliche box, then obviously salespeople are oftentimes these lone wolves who want to be out there hunting for the next
Mhm.
contract and everything. At the same time, you could go back and ask, well, if McGregor theory says theory X and theory Y people, while X is you have to motivate Tony to get something done, or Y is Tony's naturally motivated if you provide the right environment, then our setup would be much more on the Y side. So people are
Yes.
naturally motivated. I don't have to pay them to do that stuff. But then
Interesting.
again, why did it happen? Because obviously I brought the challenge after we've
Yeah.
tried a few things, and this is the important reflection, I think. But yeah, so Lo basically said, look, similar business that he runs, the struggle and disappointment will continue. So thanks for that. It's not
Happy
necessarily the
days.
most optimistic worldview, but at least is something that was like, okay, again, is normal, is part of that phase as well. And even if you get through it, it doesn't mean it's completely going away. And he could base it on some of these experiences that he has made with his company, where he said, look, for these big companies based on trust, there's a bit of a special niche kind of expertise that you have and references, which
Okay.
also means it just takes time. And the clear recommendation was focus on quality
Yep.
and start sharing it online so people are actually aware. But maybe a few webinars here and there, try to generate those leads, and then kind of be a bit patient with the thought leadership thing to happen. That was actually really good advice, because we were not really strong on the whole social media side. We were also not super
Okay.
strong on sharing content or use cases or success stories, simply because of up to 2019, 2020 was going linear or exponential upwards anyway. So why would you
Okay.
spend time on that stuff? Right? So it's actually a good suggestion there.
It's quite interesting, isn't it? When you do hit growth and things are running really, really well, sometimes you don't develop other areas of the business because you never had to.
Exactly.
So, and why would you spend time on things which aren't going to be useful? But it's about broadening out that environment, isn't it? Broadening out your business and getting that feedback. Okay, and so Lucy gave you some really interesting about create a script for lead generation. I like that. What did that? How did that hit home?
Yeah, so I do enjoy the broader views that, for example, David brought in, just to
Yep.
keep a bit of a bigger picture. But it's also really helpful to get just this is something I can do tomorrow kind of stuff, really actionable, really tangible stuff. So, and Lucy's obviously really good with that, so I always appreciate
Yep.
that. And she's just created something like that for her own company, of course, where it's like, okay, how do we generate more leads
Mm.
without being her as a CEO involved? And it's a
Yeah.
similar question for me, obviously, right?
Okay.
Yes, the challenge was how do we grow from 2 to 10 big clients, but it's related to, well, if we could do that a bit more, decentralized, and not always Tim has to develop these other 8 big clients, well, then obviously it would be easier, right? So this script for lead generation was a super helpful idea, and with that, obviously, you can get other people involved in the lead generation process.
Okay, and so that again, it's getting these nuggets of gold and information that sometimes you just don't get, or you don't get presented in such a way. And so we got the last one here from Deep. What was that?
Yeah, so Deep, I don't know, it was observation, recommendation kind of
Yeah.
mix in a way, where he said, that we were really excited about this teal concept, so
Mhm.
holocracy, teal kind of self-managing, self-organization concept. But we were not really talking about the result. So we're not really talking about the value that the client
Okay.
actually gets, right? So what is the impact we are creating for the client, for example, with transformation services or whatever? Because the transformation service is nice, but it's basically just the tool or the process. So why would the client do that? What's the impact? What's the end result? And I think, Deep, obviously being in that service industry also forever, it's just really helpful to say, well, we should probably reframe some of our, well, website, sales slides, you name it. So that was really helpful.
Oh,
And for this specific one, I mean, I said before, this whole Joe was really big on the incentive plan, but there was 3 other people, I think, as well, who mentioned it. So we
yeah.
really had a look into that. So that was a good discovery. We did look into, should we hire something like in sales executive, customer success manager, something like that as well, and for small or still relatively small company.
So you had that a year and a half ago. and now we're a year and a half forward in 2023. When you look back on that challenge and you go, okay, so I'm looking back on it, I'm seeing it now. What do you think was the long-term value of that challenge?
So I think two parts that have been especially valuable. One, I've shared it with what we call the strategy circle. There's 4 or 5 people who we discuss a bit of strategy. We did change KPIs, so based on Joe's inputs. So we didn't create an incentive plan because we don't do that stuff, but we did change KPIs, right? And what was really surprising, and that's maybe the other feedback to Joe that I should provide some point in time, is it's actually not so much about what do you pay them, but am I clear on the objective that we're having? Is everyone clear on what we are trying to do? And the answer is probably they weren't. And now it's like 1.5, 2 years later, we actually have 5, 6 big clients now.
Hey,
so this is it did work some way. So either it was magic or because of Joe's inputs or the other inputs as well. I don't know.
I'll put it down to the challenge and COCF myself, Tim.
Totally. That's good.
No, so you actually so you got 6 large clients.
Exactly. So we're much more diversified now from a client base.
Wow.
We've actually been able to acquire quite some of these big new clients as well. Now, obviously, the next challenge will be how do you sustain that? How do you grow it to the 10 that was the ambition before? Because as I said, there was a bit high ambition. But I think for the last 1.5, 2 years, growing it to 6 big clients is already really, really successful. And now we're thinking about how to go the next step. I actually did go back earlier this year on this challenge on, should we hire a sales executive person? That also came up and was one of the discoveries actually back then. And we decided not to do that simply because of, the investment that it would have meant for us. And we were anyway, going with more clarity, I guess. So now we're coming back to that point 1.5, 2 years later, which is also interesting, and actually pinged Lucy again and say, hey, Lucy, how do we do that? Because it's your business and, you know how to properly hire people in a way. So it's also interesting how these things tend to come back in a way.
It's really, really interesting. And obviously, the life sciences team did such an incredible amount of work over that period as well. So I think it's, what's your final, for anyone who's watching this and they're a CEO, leader of a company, based on growing from, say, 2 large clients to 10, what one piece of, or one recommendation would you give them?
I think one part, and this is obviously part of the COCF concept as well, is it's just good to have dedicated time to think that stuff through. Right? Because I at least have a tendency, and I think many of us as CEOs have that tendency. You never have time. You never take time for these bigger questions. So it's actually good to just think it through properly. Okay. And also really, there's reasons why companies have been run in certain ways. Doesn't mean I necessarily like an incentive plan, but what is behind the tool in a way. So I think reflecting on whatever tool you have, it doesn't need to be an incentive plan, of course, but really just think about, okay, why do people have incentive plans? What was the whole goal behind it? Is it because Tony's lazy and we need to motivate him, or is there other things, right? Oh, sorry, Tony. No, but this is really the helpful stuff for me. And again, I think just to also, you obviously get colorblind in a way if you run your own company and you're doing things like you always do them, of course, in a way. So this is the value, I think.
Oh, that's really good advice, Tim. Thank you so much. I know you're incredibly busy, and you've made your time for us today. I really appreciate it. Thank you very much, Timm Urschinger, for CEO Reflex.
Thank you. Pleasure.